once again, welcome everybody for joining us for Saturday Sesh. My name is Trey. I'm with the Academy of Cannabis Science, and we're so pleased to have you here today for Saturday Sesh, which we do the first Saturday of every month at noon Pacific, where we welcome in people who are moving this industry forward, who are committed to the plant, and just, we believe, have their hearts in the right place. And today is a special occasion because I get to welcome in a true cannabis hero, Vivian McPeak. Vivian is not only the director for Seattle HEMPFEST and has been for over 20 years. He's the managing editor of Skunk Magazine. He was the High Times Freedom Fighter of the Year Award recipient, as well as the High Times Lester Grinspoon Lifetime Achievement Award, Dope Magazine Emery Award for Lifetime Achievement in the cannabis industry, and was listed by Seattle Magazine one of the 50 most influential people of 2016. And really, that just kind of brushes the surface, but talk about somebody who's given their life and their passion to helping this plant and the patients and access and really fighting for all of us. And Vivian, it's my pleasure to welcome you today. How you doing?
I'm great, Trey. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And I want to say Billy, Karen, Bryce, Wendy, Ginger, Vic, Taylor, Kim, James, Raquel, Noko, and my HempFest brothers, Chuck and Mad Hatter. Great to see you guys and get to know you. And thanks for joining us. And Billy, best of luck on reclaiming your health, my brother.
And Vivian, I gave just thumbnails.
And Noko, I think Noko may have been on my show. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go for it, Trey.
No, and I failed to mention the show as well. If we encourage you all to join and follow Hempresent, which is in its 6th year. Did you say 270 episodes, Viv?
Yes.
So if you really, as you're diving deep, that's another fantastic resource where you can hear really pithy conversations from professionals throughout this industry, from advocacy, medical, so many venues, and so many angles on this. So, but Viv, let's back up a little bit and talk to us a little bit about the Seattle Peace Heathens, who some people might not be familiar with, but I think it was very influential in kind of getting the ball rolling for you. Am I right?
Yeah, the Seattle Peace Heathens was an earlier incarnation before I was involved in Seattle HEMPFEST. And I guess the short story would be that I was a rock musician in LA in the mid 80s. I had a rock mullet, long rock mullet, bigger the hair, closer to God, as we used to say back in the hair 80s. And I was playing in this band in California, in LA, and our band broke up. And so I came up to Seattle, which we're for, and I came back up to Seattle to work for my dad, who had, a painting company at the time. And really 2 events happened that inspired me to create the Peace Heathens, which was really an all-volunteer community action group that was targeting at-risk street youth and music culture people and alternative culture people to get them involved in community service and build self-esteem and communication skills and stuff. And what happened is I was up here, and I had a partner, and we had a small child. And at one point she decided she wanted to do something else, and she left and took my son with her. And so I was kind of left living in Bellevue, working as a cook at Bellevue Square. And I had all this stuff I didn't need. I had, children's stuff and furniture and, all kinds of stuff. And so I decided that, I wanted to donate that stuff somewhere. And one day I opened up the Seattle Times, and they had a front page story about a family tragedy, a man and his wife, and he had 4 children, and they had separated, and they decided to make a fresh start. And so they bought this small trailer, travel trailer, and they found this place in a trailer park where they could oversee Mount Rainier and everything. And people were coming to deliver the skirts for the trailer. And as the father approached the front door, one of the small boys got excited, and he ran across the trailer, and he fell And when he fell, his arm severed the line, the gas line to their gas heater, and this fire happened. And a long story short, the wife and a few children were killed in this fire, this horrible tragedy. And the headline was that this, a guy and his two sons were trying to make a new start, and they were burned. They're in the hospital, and there was a fund drive to find, items for them to start their new life. And I thought, wow, I've got all this stuff, and this sounds like a perfect thing that I could donate my bed and my dishes and all this stuff. And so then I went out and I kind of did this big drive. I went to Value Village and other places and told them what was going on. And I gathered, children's toys and all kinds of household items and stuff. And I put them in my truck, and I've got super long hair, rock mullet, dangly earrings, black leather jackets, stretch jeans. And I was completely butt rock 80s out. And this guy lived in Carnation. And so I called him up and I drove out there, and he opened the door, and I had this truck loaded up stuff like the Beverly Hillbillies. And he started crying. He was a good old boy. He was like a right-wing redneck, good old boy guy. And I remember he broke down crying and said, if I'd seen you 10 minutes ago, I wouldn't have spit on you. And you did all this stuff for me, right? And so, they brought me in, gave me cookies and milk. And when we unloaded all the stuff for him, and I was really moved by that transformational experience of the impact it had on him, that this alternative culture person that he would normally have judged was the person that went to these extremes, and that had a profound impact on me. And I thought, wow, how many other alternative culture people are there that would be involved in things, but there's really no organization for them to join that feels appropriate where they could be involved in community service. And then the next thing that happened was I had this small Toyota truck, and it had an AM radio station in it. And the only thing that I could find that was acceptable music-wise was this local station called KJET, Jet Radio, Jet City Radio. And it was an alternative music station before the word alternative music really had come out. It was playing things like REM and Gene Loves Jezebel and Midnight Oil and all this kind of, to me, was kind of, esoteric stuff. Because I was, used to this kind of metal scene in LA. And I fell in love with this radio station. And they came on and announced that they were going to switch to an easy listening format to generate, better ad sales. And so I thought, oh, this is crazy. And they said they wanted people to write letters to the management to try to, preserve their playlist. So I called up the DJ and I said, that's not going to work, man. And he goes, what do you mean it's not going to work? I go, people aren't going to write letters. You need to do a petition drive. And he's like, well, what would the petition say? I go, I don't know. Give me a minute. I'll call you back. So I wrote this thing out, the undersigned hereby declare that, blah, blah, blah. And I called him back and I told him I read the thing. And he says, well, that's really interesting. And we hung up. And then all of a sudden I hear the phone ring on the radio, and I hear my voice, and he had recorded it and he played it back. So then he calls me back and says, man, I've got all these people calling. I've got 25 people, these names and stuff. And so, he gave me these numbers, and I ended up doing this petition drive. And we had this petition in 35 businesses in Seattle, including all Cellophane Square records, all Tower Records stores and stuff. And Como News interviewed me in front of Tower Records with my crazy rock mullet, my eyeliner that I had and all this stuff. And we brought in 5,000 signatures in a week. And they brought me into KJET as news god for a day. And I read the news on the air and stuff. And I was able to postpone the change in music programming for about 7 months. But those two experiences really showed me that, wow, there's probably other people like myself who are alternative culture, counterculture. We'd like to be involved in doing positive things, but don't really feel like there's anywhere they fit in. And so I was living in Bellevue, and we couldn't find any weed. And my girlfriend's like, well, we need to go to the Ave. And I'm like, the Ave? What's the Ave? And she goes, it's University Avenue. You never heard of the Ave? I go, no. And so we got in my car and we go to the Ave to score a gram of weed. And I get there, and there was punk rockers and hippies and college people. It was this huge scene. The Ave in the mid 80s, late 80s was like Telegraph Avenue in the 60s, or Haight-Ashbury or something. And I went, wow, this is where the peace heathens could happen, because I had this crazy idea. Originally it was a song. And so I wrote up this kind of manifesto, and I met this guy at Espresso Aroma coffee shop who knew how to use a word processor. It was before computers. And he typed this thing out for me. And I stuck these manifestos everywhere, and my phone just started ringing off the hook. And so I had my first meeting at a house in Roosevelt District, and about 75 people showed up, and I was completely blown away. And we had all these great plans. So the first thing we did was the Seattle Crisis Resource Directory Guide. And we basically sent everybody out to gather up information about free services, food banks, shelters, sexual minority, ethnic minority, all these kind of services that were available. We dumped everything out into a pile on the living room floor and started creating categories, and then typed up everything into a guide, and we ended up with 28 provider categories with about 250 listings. And I did a lot of midnight Kinko's runs. We created this crisis guide, and we ended up giving out 21,000 copies. Had 6 editions. Seattle Police Department had them in the West and South Precinct cars. I ended up with formal letters of request from Seattle, from HUD, DSHS, Department of Corrections, Church Council of Greater Seattle. 40 different organizations were using our crazy crisis guide that had an anarchy symbol and a peace sign on the cover and stuff. And then we started doing benefit shows for the Northwest AIDS Foundation, Big Mountain Support Group, the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society boat when it came in town, things like that. And we did clean sweeps. We used to clean the Ave, sweep it, clean all the newspaper boxes off and everything. We did it called Operation Green Sweep. And so it lasted for several years, actually, for about 8 years. We had huge meetings. We did free food, soup kitchens, at Ravenna Park and stuff for homeless people. And originally, well, let me back up. I was in a band called Sticker Bush, and we're doing the Peace Heathens, and I was a peace activist. And so I was always putting up posters on the Ave and in the U District. I used to run into this guy in front of a university bookstore. And his name was Gary, and he was out there with a little table and a fake marijuana leaf lei and an Uncle Sam hat. And he had a jar of seeds in the book, and the Emperor Wears No Clothes book. First time I ever saw it. And he'd be like, hemp can save the planet, sow the seeds everywhere. And he's out there proselytizing about hemp. I used to run into him all the time. Let me wrap this all up by saying that there was a peace vigil at Gasworks Park opposing the first invasion of Kuwait by the first President Bush. And I became a part of this peace vigil. We were there for 6 months. We basically occupied Gasworks Park. And there was a guy starting a normal chapter, national organization for the reform of marijuana laws. And he made his first organizational startup meeting at our peace vigil. And so about 40 of us showed up for this meeting, and he was a no-show. And so it was very anticlimactic. And I had left early, but Gary was there, the guy I used to see in the Ave, and he said, we need to do something. This is crazy. Let's do a hemp fest. And people are saying, we need to get Vivian, he's been emceeing all of these events and everything. He's a great MC. And so I got this call from this guy named Gary, and I didn't realize it was the same guy I was seeing on the Ave all the time. And he didn't realize who I was because we didn't know each other's names. So we met up and he goes, oh, wow, you're Vivian. I go, wow, you're Gary. And so that's really, HempFest came out of that. And that's where the idea for HempFest came. And I said, well, hey, we've got this big group. Do you need like staff and security and stuff? Because we had these big, huge, clunky CBD or CB walkie-talkies and stuff. And so, eventually HempFest got so big, it just absorbed the Peace Heathens into it. And we kind of lost our identity and became a part of HempFest.
That's fantastic. What a journey. But it's inspirational, just the first part is showing up, right? And
90% of success is just showing up, they say. Yes.
Right. So being at the table and the profound effects of that for people who haven't attended a Seattle HempFest, I know it's hard to really encapsulate it, but how do you describe it to people?
Well, pre-pandemic, HempFest was the world's largest annual cannabis policy reform event down on the beautiful Seattle waterfront in 1.3 miles of conjoined park on the waterfront. And we would have about 100,000 attendees show up and 350 arts, crafts, food, and informational vendors. At one point, we're up to 6 stages. We averaged about 120 music acts, bands, about 100 plus speakers on a variety of topics, and a huge hemposium tent, a huge gigantic circus tent with panel discussions all day long, all 3 days of the event, and the world's largest outdoor head shop anywhere, because we had, basically about 300 vendors. And basically at HempFest for the 28 years that it happened, up until a few years ago, prohibition pretty much didn't exist in that little sanctuary of those parks. I mean, people just completely blazed openly, and the police over years became our friends and our allies. And it's been decades since there was an arrest for cannabis at Seattle HEMPFEST.
You're the first person I talked to in this community. I'm a cannabis immigrant, like some people on the call, and I made a call to you like out of the blue, and I was like, "Hey, I'm coming to Seattle. I want to work in the industry." And you're like, "Hey, come work at HempFest. Everybody works for free. Everybody works hard. They're all volunteer gigs, but we'd love to have you." And that was my intro to Seattle. Like, you're the first person I talked to. And so I thank you for that. A little choked up, but really grateful for you and for all the work you guys have done. Help us understand though, because people think the fight's over, right? They're like, "Oh, well, and I hear some people say this, and I don't want to, I want to shake them, but some people are like, "Oh, well, we have legal weed now. That's what we used to fight for at HempFest," and they don't understand the fight is long from over. You talk to us a little bit about that? I'm sure you've heard some of the same.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, HempFest was based on the premise that adults in a free society deserve the ability to make their own educated and informed choices about what they put in the sanctity and the sovereignty of their own bodies. And those important health choices should be made based upon truthful and accurate information, which is why, the Academy of Cannabis Sciences and entities like yours are so critical and important. And so that's why we created HempFest, because, that narrative wasn't there. As we know, there was, a lifetime or more of disinformation coming from prohibition lies, basically, and mistruths. And so, here we are, a decade into quasi-legalization. I struggle with that word. I think it's more commoditization. But let's face it, huge strides have been made. And I hear very often, "Oh, HempFest, are you guys still doing that? Isn't pot legal? Is there any reason for that anymore?" And I really bristle at that. And I usually tell those people, why don't you go to the Idaho border here, on the Washington-Idaho border, take about 10 steps in Idaho and light up a doobie, and then tell me how legal cannabis seems. There's still 40,000 people in jails and prisons in America, some of them serving life sentences for what other people in legal states are making their life savings doing. And there's about 24 Americans serving life in prison for cannabis. Somebody's losing custody of their children over cannabis right now, or losing their divorce settlement over cannabis, losing their job. People are still peeing in a cup somewhere, and things like that. So it is very frustrating. It's amazing that I'm still blown away that you can walk into a brick and mortar store, buy a gram or up to an ounce of weed, get in your car, drive off. You don't even need to look in the rearview mirror because nobody's following you. I mean, that's huge, right? But we haven't finished the job, and cannabis is federally illegal. God forbid we could get some right-wing president in a couple of years, and it could all go away. It's that, I doubt if it will, but it's that vulnerable. It could literally all go away with the stroke of a pen. And in a couple of months, all those stores and everything would be shut down. We'd be back in full-on prohibition, because we haven't changed the federal law. And technically, the state of Washington here where we're at technically kind of took over the black market, on a federal level. So it is, critically important. And it's very frustrating because organizations like Seattle HempFest or National Organization for Reform Marijuana Laws and other important organizations that are still fighting prohibition, their funding has been gutted. I mean, just gutted. And it's harder to find volunteers. It's harder to gain momentum. It's almost impossible to get media coverage these days, because there's this perception out there that pot's legal, at least in these states. And it's concerning because we still have a tremendous amount of heavy lifting to do. with all the advancement we made. And we need to really work on the social equity aspects of it, which kind of been missing. There's a lot of talk about equity, but the actual implementation has been inadequate at best, I think.
And like we've talked about, and thanks for bringing up prisoners, because that's some of the biggest ongoing crime, is the fact that people remain in prison while, like you said, other people are making life savings. So thank you for leading letter writing campaigns for dozens of years, or for what, over the length of HempFest? Have you all been doing that, your letter writing campaigns to prisoners, for how long now?
Well, that started, I want to say, about 99.
Okay.
So that started about 8 years into HempFest. And we started working with organizations like Freedom Grow, and other organizations like that, who had these extensive lists of mostly lifers and people serving in excess of 10, 20 years in prison over cannabis, which is, in itself a crime. And so we're like, wow, we've got, 100,000 people coming to our event. This is an opportunity to generate a lot of letters. We also had a huge, I forgot to mention that HempFest was powered by about 750 volunteers, right? Community volunteers, and with a 100-person core group that meets every month of the year since 1998. So we started generating these letter writing campaigns, and we would choose some particular prisoners to really generate the letter. And we would write both letters to the prisoners themselves for morale and stuff, and also write letters to elected representatives on their behalf and stuff like that. And a few, I want to say, success stories were George Martorano, who was serving life in prison and served, I think, in excess of 30 years. Jeff Mazensky, who was also serving life, and I think he served 25 years. And Jimmy Romans, who had, I think, 30 years and served, I forget, something like 20 years in prison over cannabis. And that's just mind-blowing to think that somebody could be serving, you can get 7 years for murder, right? And these guys were getting life for cannabis. And of course, we get to know them, and they became our friends. And one of the most fulfilling aspects of that is that after all these years of advocating for George Martorano and Jeff Mazensky, they got released. And I'd like to think partially because of the amazing amount of attention that we generated. And they both came to Seattle HEMPFEST. We brought them to HEMPFEST after all these years of them being in prison and hearing about it. And they got to speak on our stage to this huge audience while there's tens of thousands of people blazing at 420 right in front of them. And they got to really taste freedom after being locked up with some really serious criminals. And that was, that's like that moment when you go, wow, this is what it's all about. Here they are out of prison, experiencing freedom. This is the metric for success, and that was so thrilling and so exciting, but also really frustrating, because for every one of them, there's hundreds of other, good, decent, otherwise law-abiding Americans thrown into prison in horrible conditions, dehumanizing conditions. Yeah.
For sure. People talk about political prisoners and a lot of times forget that these are political prisoners we're talking about. And like you said, too often issues of our incarcerated individuals and equity come up very late in the conversation as states legalize, and it really should be the first thing. Sometimes, I feel like we should just stop this train and stop advocating for any more states to come on legal until we take care of those issues first, right? But
I mean, people of color, communities of color have been disproportionately targeted, scapegoated, prosecuted, and incarcerated from prohibition. I mean, it's been racist, as we all know, from the very beginning. It's been, based on racist lies and targeting vulnerable demographics and people in poverty, and people of color across the board in this country. And the thing that's so frustrating is they're the first people to be incarcerated and the last people to be able to be involved in the industry and enjoy the opportunities, right? And there are some people working very hard on that, on turning that around, like the Greenwood Project, where they're providing training to communities of color, not only to be employees, but to be in managerial and ownership positions in the cannabis industry. And so there's, there are some, the good news, I think, is the encouraging news is that in some of the states that are reforming, legislators are proactively implementing social equity components into the laws. But the problem is they just don't go far enough. They seem to be kind of window dressing a lot of times, where they're maybe well-intentioned, but not even really addressing the situation to the degree that it has to be. So I guess the first step is raising the awareness and having that knowledge that this needs to be addressed. And I guess we're at that first step. We need a lot of more progress on that.
For sure. For sure. And I know I've dominated your time, and there's some people on the call today who I'm sure would love to talk to you or ask you a question. So I want to open the floor to anybody on. What you got, folks? Otherwise, I'm going to pepper you with some questions about Skunk Magazine.
Okie dokie.
I have a question. Again, good to be here with you all. Vivian, thank you so much. Your story, I was born and raised in the rain, so it's just hitting me all in my heart. I'm so thankful for you and everything that you've done. I'm over here taking notes in complete awe and very inspiring. I'll be meeting with a deputy from LA County. They're looking to incorporate legal cannabis in unincorporated LA. What is something that you think would be the must that I talk about in this conversation, pushing cannabis upward and forward?
Well, one of the frustrating things, it's Raquel, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Beautiful name.
Thank you.
One of the frustrating things for us all these years is that we would talk about the injustices and the disproportionate targeting of vulnerable communities and stuff like that, and not get a lot of traction. But you start talking about the economic possibilities and the financial aspects, and all of a sudden you'd get people's attention. And so I think that one thing to do is to balance it and talk about the fact that this is job creation, this is raising tax revenues, this is reducing the overhead and the cost on society of incarcerating people, as well as being able to provide access to patients and diverting people from incarceration and freeing up police resources to deal with actual violent crime and things like that. Unfortunately, that kind of approach gets more traction with law enforcement and legislators and stuff than talking about the injustices of the drug war. And so I've found that if you kind of lace all that stuff in while you're talking about the injustice of the drug war, they're more receptive initially, and that kind of opens their mind. And then you start hammering them about the injustices, and the inequity and the racial components and the kind of class war components to prohibition, because it's really been a class war from day one, I think. Mm-hmm. So I would, try to talk to them in language that they identify and relate to, rather than just kind of come in with our activist rhetoric or narratives firsthand. I learned that hard way over a long period of time.
Thank you for your wisdom, your knowledge. You're giving me energy through this Zoom, and I so appreciate it. Thanks again, Vivian. And I look forward to staying in touch with you all, because I truly know it's going to take all hands on deck to move this beautiful plant forward and the beautiful people.
And I just want to really quickly, that all hands on deck is a brilliant truth. I want to call out my buddy Chuck, my brothers Chuck and Mad Hatter, both on the HEMPFEST Safety Patrol, which is our internal security. That HEMPFEST has been a community. I get a lot of attention, I'm the executive director, I'm the guy in the media and stuff, but really it's been a huge group effort of a community of regular people, of ordinary people doing extraordinary acts of activism. And so, it's been a gigantic community effort. And I think that's the most important thing to remember, is that you can't do it alone, and that 10 people can do 100 times more than one person, and 100 people can do 1,000 times more than 10 people.
That part. Thank you.
Thanks for the shout out, Viv. I'll fire right back at you. And I don't mean to, you are a visionary leader. You have corralled 1,000 stoners every year for 20 plus years into pulling off a world-class event. So bravo, man. Bravo.
Thank you, Chuck. Love you,
and
bro.
like Chuck said, Vivian, it's been an honor with you for 22 years at that gate. So I've been learning a lot from you, and thank you so much.
Back at you, bro. Congratulations on your grandson.
Thank you so much.
And I hope everybody has an opportunity to experience HempFest as it has been in the past. Like you mentioned, Vivian, over what, a mile and a half stretch where it's just a different set of rules. To see bike patrol cops sitting back and letting the community take care of its own enforcement. They're there if they need to be, but they're not alerted by cannabis people walking in with their own glass or buying glass on site, consuming safely, and all the community value you would expect, right? So we appreciate that, and hope more people get to experience it in the future.
Yeah, and Chuck showed you a little bit of the badge, but here's the actual badges.
Oh yeah,
Safety Patrol, right? It says Seattle HEMPFEST on there. HEMPFEST Safety Patrol. We're not cops, and we don't pretend to be cops, but we're there. The cops figured out that, wow, these guys have it together. They've got 100 trained people with radios and shirts, and they know what they're doing, and we're safety oriented. At HEMPFEST, we rented extra IEDs, extra heart defibrillators, and had them at our stages throughout the event, because if somebody had a heart attack at 420, you can almost can't get through the crowd. We had stop the bleed kits at our stages. We had toxic spill kits at HempFest. Our goal was to be the Eagle Scouts of the cannabis culture, to really be 100% safety conscious. And I want to say that in 28 years of HempFest, we never had a serious accident, injury, or arrest. And I think that's pretty profound for a bunch of stoners.
For sure. It's just a different world for a few days, and it was so refreshing, and it's like being on another planet when you come from the South, especially. So we appreciate all that work. Hey, tell us a little bit of, if you don't mind, Skunk Magazine. Speaking of being in another world, when I lived in South Carolina and Georgia, it was one of only 2 magazines on the rack that was different, right? It was that view into the outside world, and another set of freedom that we couldn't imagine. So what's day in the life of managing editor of Skunk Magazine like?
Well, first of all, I'm just very proud to be working with Skunk, because Skunk Magazine really shares my own personal values and ethos. It's, I believe, the only cannabis magazine dedicated solely to organic regenerative cultivation, which is so important for our hurting biosphere. But a day in the managing editor is, I get up, and I both edit the articles for the print magazine and write feature articles and interviews myself. And then I also edit and manage the website content as well. So I'll get up, and we have these platforms called Airtable, and it's a submission platform where people will upload their article and photographs and all the information. And I will, so I'll scan those and say, okay, is there any new material? And for each print issue, we do quarterly issues. There's usually about 60 to 65 articles that I will edit for punctuation and grammar and spelling and things like that. And so I'll go through and I'll edit all the articles, check out the photographs, stuff like that, work with the design, the art designer that does the layout, and with Julie, the executive editor, on kind of, what articles are going to be in the magazine, And then there's a separate submission platform for the web site as well. And I'll go and do the same thing. I'll edit all of those for grammar and punctuation and stuff. And then we'll upload the photographs and place them and all that kind of stuff, and publish them. And so that's basically it. And I write, several feature articles, 1 to 2 feature articles per issue myself. And I was, I've been fortunate recently. I published an interview with Zane Kesey, Ken Kesey's son from the Merry Pranksters, which is a counterculture icon, in our Grateful Dead issue that we did recently. And I was able to also interview Mountain Girl, Carolyn Mountain Girl Garcia, Jerry Garcia's ex-wife, who has also had a child with Ken Kesey and stuff, which is pretty exciting. And so it's been really fun because it's been kind of a door into it. It kind of gives me greater access than I already had to contact kind of high profile cannabis and beyond personalities and stuff like that. But more importantly than all that is get out the message of Skunk Magazine about the green renaissance that we have to have. Julie's got this saying that forget the green rush. What we really need is a green renaissance. We need an organic, regenerative cultivation, environmentally conscious and sustainable cannabis awareness movement that looks at cannabis beyond something that, gets you high and relaxes you, which is awesome. But that, as we all know, from Jack Hare, that cannabis can play a role in saving our planet and enhancing humanity in almost every aspect of life. And that's what Skunk's really about, is this green renaissance concept that, whether it's environmental or food or medicine or agriculture or lifestyle, there's a role in almost every aspect of life for cannabis to play and enhance. Even the people that don't smoke or imbibe in cannabis, there's thousands of ways that cannabis can enhance their life in a much more sustainable manner. And that's why I'm really proud to be a part of Skunk Magazine.
Thank you. And you mentioned earlier The Emperor Wears No Clothes. So if anybody hasn't read that book, it's still a very important book. You can still buy it online. If you have an original copy, hold on to it. They're golden now and worth a lot of money. So don't part with that. Do we have any other questions? Because I'm gonna keep on if you don't. I don't want to dominate the time though.
Go ahead, please go ahead. Then I just want to tell a story about HEMPFEST, but go ahead, Wendy.
I just wanted to say thank you, Vivian. This has been so inspirational, and I wish I'm soaked and drenched in this, just waiting for the rest of cannabis to be available or federally legal, because with the cancer stuff, yeah, I can get the medicine, but there's like a disconnect with continuity of care. And I love the concept of corralling stoners, because I would love to corral the stoners. We've known that cannabis cures cancer in the petri dish for over 30 years, but how do we get the rest of the message out? Is it gonna, help the humans, and is it gonna kill cancer in humans? We just don't know the whole story. So I love you've been so inspirational, and I'm just, is there any way for cancer that you think we could also connect and just get through the red tape so that we could see, does cannabis kill cancer in humans too?
Yeah, Wendy, I think the thing to point out is that the kind of research that we need, and we're certainly not going to see cannabis utilized efficiently or adequately in allopathic mainstream medical use. That one thing standing in the way of all of that is its federal illegality and its placement as a Schedule I controlled substance. And until we can convince the politicians, who kind of, I think, are mentally in the old world. I don't think that they are adequately in this new world yet, that they're still, looking at cannabis like it's a taboo politically and stuff, which really isn't the case anymore. If you look at polling, cannabis was more popular than Joe Biden or Donald Trump nationally, right? So what we need to do is to get through to our elected officials that the time is now, that cannabis is not the gateway to drugs, it's the gateway to economic recovery for America, in part. And it's also just the gateway to relief of suffering, a more humanitarian approach. I think that cannabis should be the first line of defense for intractable pain. That cannabis should be one of the first lines of defense for cancer management, instead of the last, which is what it is right now. And educating the politicians, they are very busy. They don't know everything. Some of them really appreciate being educated. And on the hempfest.org website, we have an entire page of how to talk to your legislator, how to schedule a meeting with your representative, how to come prepared, how to provide them information, how to follow up with them, things like that. Because it's actually, once you do it 1 or 2 times, it's not very scary. And you're their constituent, they work for you. And sometimes you've got to remind them of that very politely, that, you are demanding some action from them. And if you don't get it, there are consequences that are called elections. But it's really about changing that federal law so that we can get the barriers out of the way of the cannabis research, I think.
Cool. Thank you. Chuck, you got a question, a story you want to share?
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I see we got 2 minutes left. So I want to tell the story of those HempFest Safety Patrol badges. So 97 to 2007, we have an okay but uneasy relationship with the Seattle Police Department. I think it was around 2006, their union said they cannot have the officers patrol the event because they may be exposed to cannabis smoke. And if they had to shoot somebody, they would have to testify in court that they were possibly impaired. Hilarious. So you got to, back in those days, HempFest, there's 175,000, 200,000 people in that park. And we had police on horseback and riding through bikes, and it kept order. They refused to patrol. There was the year they did not enter that park. And we had to turn from being anything but security. We were staff, like soft, we were the non-authority. We had to become authority. And I've seen some very alternative looking, freaking awesome brothers and sisters pull that thing off. And we did it for 20 plus more years. We didn't generate any serious arrests. There were no major injuries. And the other thing I would put out there, one of the big secrets to the success, is no alcohol is allowed at HempFest.
Yes.
Yeah. And thanks for pointing that out. Obviously, cannabis it's times and times exponentially safer than safer than alcohol. So I think we know that, but sometimes people need to be reminded, right?
And I want to call out that Chuck is humble. Chuck was the head of Safety Patrol at that time. He was actually at the helm and did a tremendous job advancing the level of skill and organization of the group.
Thanks, man. That was scary, man. We were relying. You guys got to understand. There's 100,000 people, and the whole thing staffed by volunteers, man.
That's right.
And it was nice to have civil authority in there. And then thank you, Bill. So much love to Seattle HempFest.
One of the most surreal things was when we met with our lawyers and met with the police and said, you need to come into our pot rally and you need to walk through and make an appearance every once in a while. And it's like, are we really asking the police to come into our HempFest and be present? But we're like, you can't just leave us out in there with 100,000 people. They need to see that there's backup, right? And that's why we went to the point of actually creating badges and stuff, because we realized that subconsciously people needed to take us seriously. And people were trained that they see these badges and these radios and stuff, that they're just subconsciously trained to react to authority. And it was actually a little controversial in the beginning that we would have badges and stuff, but we decided that it was necessary because we were responsible for the safety of 100,000 people. And a bottom line, and this has been our ethos from the very beginning, our credo, there was no political cause more important than one person getting hurt. Our goal to HempFest was, did anybody die? Is anybody hurt? Did we get busted? Is the money missing? If those three things aren't happening, then it's not a crisis. It's an issue that we can deal with.
And just thank you overall. I thank you for your time today, but more importantly, thank you for a life dedicated to this cause. And we know within that cause, there are a lot of many causes that make that up. But thank you for your commitment, unwavering commitment, and the fight that you continue to wage, and the education you continue to provide. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you, Trey. Back at you. And I just want to, send my love and appreciation to all you folks that are here in the meeting, and anybody else that's going to be watching. We're just one big, beautiful global cannabis family at our best, when we're at our best. And we can do this. We can finish this job. We can legalize. We can change the world. And cannabis has its humble, small, but profound role.
Amen. And we hope that you all will continue to come back and see us for Saturday Sesh. Next month in April, we're going to host Evelyn LaChapelle. She leads the Prisons to Prosperity program for Last Prisoner Project. She herself was formerly incarcerated and has a what would have been a tragic story turned around because of her attitude and because of her work, and advocates just like Vivian that helped her to get out. Then in May, we're going to have the happy chemist, Harold Hahn, who's the co-founder and chief science officer of Vertosa, and he's a specialist in emulsions. So we're going to talk all about cannabis chemistry. And then in June, we're going to have Russ Hudson, author of The Big Book of Terps. So we hope you'll come back for those events. Check us out online. Enrollment's open if you want to join us for a class. And you know that you are all welcome at Cannabis Alliance events too. So have a great weekend. Thank you so much, and y'all stay safe.